Hello and welcome everyone to this masterclass on how to add wedding rings to your jewelry business. I'm Jessica Rose, lovely to meet you if we've not met before. And I am joined, as you can see, by the lovely, smiley, beautiful Hayley Kruger.
Oh, thank you. Hello.
So I think a lot of you will have met Hayley before, but if you haven't, Hayley has worked with us for a long time. She teaches courses at the London Jewellery School and for Jewellers Academy online. And she's an amazing jeweler. I'm going to make her blush now, but an incredibly skilled bench jeweler. And she's been making wedding rings for people for how long, Hayley? A while.
A long time, yeah. I mean, I'd say more recently, as a more regular thing, the last 3 or 4 years, but dipping in and out for many years.
Yeah. And if any of you follow Hayley on Instagram or Facebook, if you don't, you definitely should. It's Hayley Kruger Jewellery. But you'll see pop up every now and then her wonderful commissions and things that she's making, engagement rings, wedding rings, and lots of other fun stuff as well. So yes, good evening all. We'll come and say hello to you guys. So Ruth is here, Kerry is here, Liz is here, Diana and Alice, Jill, Selena. If you've not been on one of these sessions before, then well done for making it here. The hardest part, I always say, is getting in. And you'll see there's a chat bar. It's normally on the side, or on the phone, it's underneath. So feel free to come and talk to us throughout the session. And most importantly, if you want to ask a question to Hayley, we'll do a little Q&A section at the end. There is a button or a tab along the screen that says ask a question. So do make sure you put your questions in there so that we don't miss them, because sometimes it goes very quickly in the chat. And yes, we'd love to answer the questions that you have for this session. So we're running this session today partly just to help and to have a talk, and it's open to everyone, but also for anyone who doesn't know, we have a wedding rings course which is coming out this Friday, which is very exciting. And we filmed it just before the lockdown. So we had like these days filmed, so luckily, like just literally the day before the lockdown. So it was all quite dramatic.
Serendipitous.
Exactly. Yes. Thank God we had some filming then, because then we get some fun stuff to do now. But it's a really great course. You can see the link at the bottom. I'll share more about it towards the end. But it's taught by Barbara Yard, who is a wonderful tutor as well at London Jewellery School and Jewellers Academy. And, we cover lots of different things. So do check it out, because it's on pre-sale at the moment, which means it's 50% off, but only until Friday. So get it before then to make sure you get a good deal, and come and make some wedding rings with us. So Hayley, just before we get started, you just want to share a little bit about your journey to being here today, to being a jeweler, and a little background to who you are and what you do for anyone who's not met you before.
Yeah, sure. So it's been a longish process. I've always made jewelry, but as a child it was more beaded stuff. And then when I got to a certain point of being in my mid-20s, I thought, I actually hadn't done anything serious in terms of my career, but I knew I wanted to do something creative. So I did a few short courses. And a couple of those were actually being at a bench. It was a 5-week introduction to working with silver and making jewelry. And it was destiny had arrived at that point. So from that point, I did do a degree, although I would not say that that's at all necessary, especially not now. And then I went into work in the retail industry as a jewelry designer, but designing costume jewelry, which was really fascinating in terms of lead times and costing, and also creativity. And then, of course, the stock market crashed and I had to adapt, which is what you have to do. So I started teaching at the London Jewellery School, and it was absolutely a wonderful introduction to the next stage of my career, because I was not only teaching people but learning on the job. So I was learning about metalworking again, and having to improve my own skills as I was teaching. And actually that kind of led me to work for myself again. I was always freelancing, but then actually that desire to make came back, and stone setting became my thing. And so now I actually work as a fine jeweler mostly. I do still teach, and my thing is gem setting, fine jewelry, and it's mainly commissions at this stage, but who knows where things will go from here. So.
Yeah. Brilliant. And we've been very lucky to have her. So yes, it's been wonderful to see your journey as well. So like Hayley said, she did all, you know, this whole fashion range and some really cool things. I always associate your work with color, and, you know, whether it's the gemstones or the fashion work or, you know, the high end or whatever, it's yeah, it's always very joyful and bright.
Thank you. That's the intention. So thanks.
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay, so wedding rings. So we thought we would start by talking about the metal, which we all love. So yeah, when it comes to wedding rings, I guess what are the common metals that people tend to use, and what are the considerations that we need to have as a jeweler when we're thinking about working with different metals and matching them to engagement rings, things like that?
Well, it's quite broad, but it's generally fine metals like gold and platinum, I find, are the most common metals. And of course, within gold, you have your 18 karat and your 9 karat, and then your color ranges. Most commonly used are probably white gold and yellow gold, 18 karat, but really it can vary. So what you have to consider in all of those is, if the wedding band is for a woman who's got an engagement ring, what is the metal of her engagement ring made of? What is that metal? Because traditionally you would ideally pair up the metal and have the same metal with the two rings, and there is a practical reason for that, and it's wear and tear. So if you've got a harder metal, let's say a platinum wedding band up against a 18 karat yellow gold or white gold engagement ring, the platinum band could potentially wear down any stone setting and weaken those areas. So that's the reason. But rules are meant to be broken, and people have ideas of their own. So you've also got to work with the client and actually advise, but also be flexible.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So yeah, it's making sure that they match to a certain extent. But I guess if you're matching like an 18 karat, say, yellow gold with a white gold, would they be fairly similar? I know platinum's quite different, but would that kind of, if they wanted the two metal colors, but perhaps not necessarily having to be platinum?
Absolutely. And even within wedding bands themselves, you will have wedding bands that have white and yellow gold and even rose gold combined within one band. Although there's no movement in that, you can definitely combine different metals. And yes, you can combine different colors in separate rings as well. There's no reason why you can't do that. It just comes down to white gold is a little bit harder than yellow gold because it's mixed with more metals, but really it's minimal.
Yeah. And how do you feel about mixing carats or even using silver?
Well, it depends really. It's interesting because I've had a commission like that being requested at the moment, and I would certainly, I would certainly wouldn't have a problem with mixing higher carats together. Let's say a 22 inherited yellow gold band with an 18 karat. But the request was a 22 karat gold with a 9 karat, and I actually have advised against that because of the wear and tear. 22 is very soft, and also when it comes to hallmarking, you pay more for double hallmarks, but also they will, if you can only have one, they will mark it as the lesser carat. So, and that's something to take into consideration. But there's no reason, there's no definite no to that. If it's perhaps a whole lot of inherited jewelry and people really feel sentimental about those metals, it can absolutely be done. It's not a technical thing, it's more practical.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess with silver, it's not ideal, is it, for wedding rings because of the, you know, how soft it is and something that's going to be forever. But now, having said that, some people do. It's not, like you said, everything.
Yes. I actually would like to make that point in that silver is not a no-no. It's just traditionally in hundreds of years ago, they use gold. So that's why silver is less popular. It's just tradition. But there's no reason why silver, we shouldn't be snobbish about silver. Silver, it's what it represents and not the metal itself. You can still use silver and it be a very sentimental and beautiful piece, and that's absolutely fine.
Yeah. Brilliant. And then if you're using 18 karat white gold in particular, there's often a certain look to it, isn't there? Do you want to tell us a bit about that and things that we can do to?
Yeah, so 18 karat white gold and 9 karat as well. The true color of that gold is actually quite grey. It's like a dark, almost a gunmetal grey, and that's really beautiful in itself. But traditionally, actually, people rhodium plate it to give it a really white, bright look. So that's something that you need to take into consideration, that if you want to keep it that grey color and the customer is happy for that, absolutely fine. It will wear really well. But if you're going to have it rhodium plated, after a while, after a few years of wearing, that will actually wear down, and that plating will need to be replated. So you need to make your customer aware of that, or give them the option of the 2 colors before you get started with the commission.
Yeah, and that's the plating is something you'd outsource. You'd take it to a platers, and
most definitely, definitely.
I'd be interested to know actually from everyone that's on with us live, what if you're married, what metal your wedding ring is. It'd just be an interesting kind of poll.
Yeah.
And if you're not, what would you want it to be if you were to get married? I think I love yellow gold. I think I would be 18 karat yellow gold probably. I just love that color, the brightness and against the gemstones. But it's, have you noticed over the years, like different trends in what people use, or is it just every couple's different?
Yes, every couple is different, but there are definitely trends. Yellow gold has come back. There's no question about that. The downside to yellow gold coming back is that at the moment, the price of gold is pretty high. Yeah. So platinum is actually, and I haven't checked for a few days, but platinum has actually been a little bit cheaper than gold, 18 karat yellow gold. So platinum's having a bit of a revival because people are using that because it's always had that image of being a more prestigious metal. So it depends on budget. It depends on personal preference. I mean, a lot of people come in with their engagement rings from many years ago and they have them remade because they had them in yellow gold and now they want them in white gold or platinum. Yeah. So it's very personal, but there are trends and they're not necessarily about fashion or taste. Sometimes they're economically driven as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating. It's interesting to see all the comments as well. There's lots of platinums, white golds, quite a few 22 karat gold. Great.
Yeah.
So yellow
22 karat gold is commonly used in traditional jewelry, particularly Indian jewelry. And it's I've had the pleasure of working with it. It is like butter to work with. It is possibly my favorite metal, but because of the high value, it comes along very rarely, unfortunately.
Yes, yeah. And have you ever made an engagement ring in 24 karat? Is that just too soft? Like
it's too soft. That's pure. Yeah. That's like your 999 silver.
Yeah.
It's too soft. Yeah.
You just scratch and all of those things. But no, it's really interesting. Thank you guys for sharing. It's I find it fascinating. And it's good to just know, I guess, as the jeweler, like you said, rules are made to be broken and the client might say, I just really want this. But I guess you can let them know you can have this, but these are the potential things that might happen further down the line to look out for. Like I thought it was really interesting what you said about, because I've always thought if 2 bands are next to each other, if you see one rubbing it down, you can kind of clock it and then maybe adjust it. But a stone setting is such a small bit of metal that actually you might not notice. So I thought that was quite an interesting point.
Absolutely.
To be aware of. So let's move on to talking about sizing, because I think this is something that might stop a lot of people, especially selling these kind of things online. And, especially in today's climate, there's a lot more selling online. So both in person and online, how do you manage sizing for wedding rings? And are there any sort of tips you could share?
Yeah, sizing, look, it's even when you've experienced, sometimes it's a bit tricky to get spot on. And that's because we've all got different shaped fingers. Some people have got knuckles, some people have got pointy fingers, some people have got elongated. There's such a variety in our hand shape. And also you've got to take into consideration the size, or rather the width of the wedding band itself. So if you've got a really broad, chunky man's wedding band, that's going to feel quite snug on his finger. So if it's a gentleman who's never worn a ring before, that's going to feel very, very foreign to him, because he's all of a sudden got a very broad band squishing all the flesh on his finger. He's going to feel a little bit suffocated. So if it was somebody that's never worn a ring before, I would actually recommend not such a chunky ring. And perhaps later on down the line they could change. But if it's somebody who's loves wearing jewelry, they already know that it's going to feel like that. In terms of a finer wedding band, they tend to be a little bit easier to size. So if somebody already has their engagement ring, if they know the size of that, you've already got the size. Of course, when you put a wedding band up against an engagement ring, it doubles the size of that, the width of that band. So it might need to be a half size up. In terms of sizing itself, what I would suggest is having a variety of ring sizing tools. So the ring sizes that you can get some really delicate ones, you can get some mid-range kind of D-shaped ones or court-shaped ones, and you can get really broad ones. And you can also get some really lovely kits that actually come with lots of half sizes, but they become a bit more expensive. But I have learned from experience that you kind of need to have not just one type of ring sizing tool to hand.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I have seen them on Cooksons where they have the thick D-shaped one and they're quite chunky. And then there's obviously the standard one, which is just a bit of wire. So I imagine that you would work out with your client if it's a fine piece or a chunky piece, and then use the respective size.
That's right. And also, sorry to interrupt, if you have a finer band, you often find that will, and if it's more rounded, that will actually, you might measure up at a size K, but you can probably get away with that being fitted onto a couple of sizes down, or maybe even a couple of sizes up, because the rounded, softer shape allows you to push the ring onto the finger much more comfortably. But if you've got a very sharp-edged band and a broader band, you have less leeway with your sizing.
That makes a lot of sense for any of us ring wearers. I definitely noticed my round pieces versus even my D shape, you know, because D shape does have a much sharper kind of edge, which kind of brings us on quite nicely to talking about, you know, profiles of rings, the shapes of the wire. So there's obviously the round and the D shape and the comfort fit. What ones, do you want to tell us a bit about those for anyone who's not heard about them before? And also what ones seem to be popular? What ones do we generally use for wedding rings, or in your experience?
Well, what I would say about those is certainly the softer, rounder ones that are rounded on the inside are most certainly more popular and more comfortable, and I would always do that. I wouldn't actually get too concerned with that. When you, let's say, for example, you go into some of the suppliers' websites, they give you the profiles of all those types of bands. If you're making it yourself and you're making the band from wire, you're not going to get those profiles. So a D shape is a flat on the outside and a curve on the inside, but you can have a reverse D as well. It can be curve on the outside, flat on the inside. A court shape is slightly gently curved on both sides. You can have a flattened court, or sometimes known as a comfort fit as well. So, but I wouldn't get too bogged down with those shapes, because when you're making it from scratch yourself, from a piece of wire, you can actually use your files, your needle files and your bigger files, to actually create those shapes and to soften the edges and to make that ring suit your customer. So when you come, if you choose to perhaps have a very broad range of wedding rings in the future, and you have a sample of all of the possibilities that you offer, then it's worth worrying about all of those profiles. But to begin with, I would say stick with something like a flat band, a D shape, a rounded on the inside. But if you're making them bespoke, they're going to suit the customer. And actually, if you're making it to match an engagement ring, ideally it will be a similar profile to the band on the underside of the engagement ring as well. Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. And I guess you don't want to have too many options to overwhelm people with as well, because they might come to you and say, well, actually, I want it like this. But if they
you know, I've experienced people who just like, I just want a ring. I just want
Yes.
a gold ring. They don't
Yeah.
really know the words and the terminology for anything. And then you start sharing, well, do you want this carat or that carat? And sometimes it's that overwhelm, isn't it, of decision making.
Absolutely.
Whereas if you actually say, what about this? And then
That's so
yeah.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially if they're getting married, they've got a million other things, other decisions
Yes.
to make as well.
Exactly. Exactly.
So,
No, you're quite right. Simplify the whole process for them, and it makes everybody happier.
yeah. And then I guess in terms of adding this as a line to a business, how did that work for you? Like, was it officially a line that you added, or did people just start asking for them? And when someone asked, were you like, oh my gosh, I couldn't, you know, if you think back to your first one, did you ever feel like it's just too much pressure, or what kind of happened with you around coming into this?
So it was never a conscious decision to have a line of wedding bands. And actually, technically, I don't really still on the to-do list. But it came along just as people requested it. And like many people out there, you know, you think, oh gosh, I have no idea how to use gold, or I'm a petrified, I don't know what to do. To be honest, it is absolutely, I wouldn't say completely the same as working with sterling silver, but it is very similar. You form the ring in exactly the same way. You file it, you sand it, you polish it in exactly the same way. The differences comes to when you're soldering. Golds and precious metals have different melting temperatures, but nothing that's too scary. But you'll never know how those work unless you give it a go. So if you're really worried about it, maybe try buying a little bit of 9-carat gold. Actually, 9-carat, although it's the cheapest, is the hardest to work with. So if you can master 9-carat gold, you'll fly on the other metals. So yeah, it is trial and error and building up confidence, and perhaps offering a little range of basic rings. But to be honest, I just worked as the need came up and adapted to what the customer wanted.
Yeah, I guess there's different ways I've seen it done. Is there's some jewelers who I think just get asked to do wedding rings on because someone's bought jewelry from them and they love their jewelry and they're getting married, so they know that jeweler and they come to them because they trust them. And you know, we know that people buy from people they know, like, and trust, so they've already bought something from you, they've had a great experience, and then they ask. And then the other way I've seen it done is people do bring out, you kind of announce it as you know, this is something that I offer, this is a service. And I think if you have an intention that you'd like to do wedding rings, that's a nice thing to do, because it's just, you know, if you don't ask, sometimes we don't get. So perhaps having a page on your website or doing a little launch and sharing some wedding rings, especially if you've got a bit of a style, because I guess there's a natural wedding ring, which is just like a plain band. But if you have a kind of signature style in your jewelry, you might create a few bands that have just a little touch of that to just show your personality a little bit. But it's interesting to hear how it's evolved for you, because I think it's different, isn't it, for everyone? But it's
I agree. I think your point about people will come back to what they know. Pretty much all of, well, not all, but many of the wedding bands that I have done are from people who have had the engagement rings done by me, or have been recommended by somebody who had their engagement and wedding rings done. So that's really important. You know, just keeping up a good customer service there is good as well. That brings people back. So
yeah, absolutely. And I agree. If I've only done a few engagement rings, but the ones that I've done, they've always said, now you have to do the wedding ring. It's just the natural progression. So so yeah, if you're struggling to get wedding ring sales, perhaps you need to add engagement rings to the list, because it's like you said, because I guess as well, it's, you know, encouraging people to choose handmade over going to the high street, because you can quite easily go to a high street store, buy a wedding band, that they're not that expensive and all those things. So I think when someone's gone the handmade route for the engagement ring, they're much more likely to be the kind of person that really values the additional benefits and value that they get from handmade wedding rings as well. So, and people are becoming much more conscious of that. Yeah.
They are. It's definitely benefited my business. What I would also say about that, and it might not seem fair to say this to people who are still getting started, but actually making a wedding band is probably the easiest piece of jewelry that you can get a really good markup on, because if you've done a beginner's silver band, you can do a gold wedding band. That's the thing of it. But obviously there's a much greater value, and you can make that ring in a few hours, but you can actually, the profit that you can add on top of that is a pretty good few hours work. So in terms of a business perspective, it's a really good thing to do.
Yeah, totally agree. I think every jeweler should be able to make a wedding ring, because like you said, it's not that hard. And I think it's just the pressure of it's for life, and you know, it's an expensive piece that puts some of us off. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that nearly everyone on this session today could, with some training perhaps, or perhaps already start, you know, adding wedding rings as an option for their business. And you know, after all of this kind of dies down and everything, you know, that's happening in the world, people are still going to be getting married. That's something that's just always going to happen. And so that's a nice kind of bit of security in a way to add another line of income to your business. So in terms of pricing, quoting customers, and just dealing with the whole financial side of it, I guess that's another thing that could potentially be a barrier for people who are new to doing wedding rings. And perhaps if you're used to selling silver work and perhaps charging less than £100 for your pieces, and then we're maybe making the jump to be charging quite a lot more, how did you deal with that yourself? Or how do you feel confident to say, like, this is the price, and communicate your pricing with your customers?
I must admit, in the beginning, it is difficult to know your worth, or to feel like people will pay that. But if you stick to an hourly rate that you believe that you're worth, and that goes up as your skills develop, and your reputation, then if you stick with that, you'll be surprised at how many people actually go, oh yeah, that's fine. So obviously there's the cost of the materials, there's the cost of the hallmarking, perhaps a little bit of postage in there if that's something you have to do, and various other things if you're using packaging, that you're including the price of that in your piece. And then of course your hourly rate. So however many hours you think that's going to take you to make, then that goes on top of it. Then of course, whatever that works out at, do you feel like you could add a profit on top of that as well? So you can actually do a little bit of shopping around yourself and look at what a plain 18 karat yellow gold band will go for in a high street jeweler, or and I wouldn't go to the cheapest jeweler, because that's not your target market. I would go to a mid-range jeweler, or even a high-end jeweler, not the big, you know, expensive brands, but you can actually just make a judgment and see, well, if they're charging that and somebody looks at my prices, actually they're going to think, I can do that. So
yeah, and I think what you said is important about thinking about the time it's going to take. I always think you should charge more with more expensive pieces, because your risk is higher. So if something happens to the piece, you've got to effectively buy that metal again. I mean, of course it won't, because, you know, we'll be pros, but you know, go for it.
Sorry, I'm getting all excited. To make a point on that, in any piece that you're making that is a precious metal item, whatever the cost of the metal and your initial costs are, that's the minimum amount of deposit you need to take. And I always take a deposit if I have to put any outlay into buying metals, because if somebody changes their mind, that's it, that's covered. And the deposit is there for that reason. I would never, ever make a piece unless it was a very dear friend. But even then, that's not a good idea.
Even worse, probably.
But yeah, so
yeah, I think you're right, because people can be shopping around and they might change their mind or go with someone else. So you don't want to buy that metal until they have paid for it already in your account. It's clear. Yeah, absolutely. And I think we normally say to take around 50% deposit is a good amount, because, you know, unless they've got a reason that they can't pay for it, getting that commitment is it's good for the customer as well, you know, because like I said, you know, customers aren't perfect, and they're often they can be indecisive, they can be planning a wedding and working full time and doing all these things, and actually just getting them to commit to something can make them feel more at ease, like, oh, we've got that sorted, you know, that's coming. And how do you manage the kind of timeline of everything? Because I guess, with weddings, there's a date, and making sure you've got plenty of time to get everything sorted in time.
Well, that's it. You've got to know the final date that they need it by. And I would give yourself probably 3 to 4 weeks buffer on that minimum, because, things get in the way, stuff happens. But you also need to take into consideration getting things hallmarked. So that's about a week out of your timeline as well. So in terms of a time, it's tricky to say exactly what I give, because some people are very organized and they come to you, 12 months in advance. And then you think, oh, I've got loads of time. Get it done when they come to you, because time catches up on you. And that will be a job done and out the way as well. And then at least they can either have it in advance, or you can give it to them close at the time. But when you've got other jobs piling up, you don't have that one to worry about. But yes, I would certainly leave a buffer of about 3 to 4 weeks before the deadline date.
Yeah, that sounds very wise. I think all parties will be happy about that. And another thing that reminded me of is that, the jewelry school, we teach the wedding ring making classes where couples come and make their wedding rings together. They tend to make the band, and then sometimes there are extras they want to add, like stone settings or engraving. I know sometimes inside they might want to put the date of the wedding or a special quote or message. So what do we do when someone comes and they want these more advanced kind of things? And we're like, we're not engravers unless we are, in which case, hats off, that's incredible.
Yes.
How do you manage all of that in your business?
Well, to be honest, that might have been the thing that put me off initially, because it's the fear of not being able to do something. And, nobody does a job where they do everything perfectly. That's why we outsource. You get an accountant and you get various other people to do other things for you. And it's the same with this. So there are stone setters out there or even jewelers who outsource all their stone setting. So if somebody wants lots of little tiny gems or diamonds grain set all along the band, that's something I would outsource. I can grain set, but somebody else can do it 1,000,000 times better than I can do it. So rather than having the stress of worrying about that and spending double the time, I will be happy to pay somebody else to do that. So there's always that option there for you, unless, of course, you can do it yourself. In terms of engraving, again, there are people who specialize in that. There's also, it can be machine engraved. So actually the cost of that isn't that high, unless you want it hand engraved, which is now a very a valued art form, and they can do amazing things. But actually, the London Assay Office provides engraving services, which you can have done when you're having your hallmarking done. And I'm not sure if Birmingham and the other in Sheffield do that too, but it's definitely worth investigating.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And I've definitely seen this with jewelers, and I've done it myself as well, where I've taken on projects and there's certain elements that I can do and I make the piece, and, and then there's things that they want that, like you said, I would much rather have someone else do for various different reasons: time, money, stress, all the above.
Yep.
And just being, and then you become almost like a little project manager, that you're, getting it to the hallmarking, and then perhaps getting it plated and getting, your engraving done and your stone setting done. And there's experts who can do all of these things. And it doesn't mean that it's not a handmade piece. You still made the piece. You're still delivering the service. And, like Hayley said, you may fall in love with one of those techniques and want to learn how to do it, in which case, brilliant. But at the same time, that you're never limited by your skills. You can always learn more, but you can always you're resourceful. You can find what you need for your clients as well.
If you go to a very big jewelry house, these master jewelers of the big names, they will be specialist departments that do one department does the stone setting, one department does the sketching, one department does the forming. So even in those places, there are people doing separate jobs. So, you can't do it all. Maybe you can, and hats off to you, but it's there are people who can do it very, very well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you said about the customer service and supporting your customers, and all of those things are really important to be able to add, and they're things that someone else can't really do. So it's working out in a business, you know, especially as your businesses grow and you might have different lines and things like that, working out where you want to prioritize your outsourcing and where you actually are really invaluable and needed and need to be present with your customers. So really interesting. So I can see there are lots of questions. I have more, but I'm going to stop mine because there's already 21, and I want to get through as many questions with everyone here as we can. If we don't get through your question today, then we will ask Hayley them afterwards anyway, and we'll answer them by we'll type them in afterwards. So we will try and get to everyone's, but I'm going to have a quick look because I can see that there's lots. So there's a question from Jan who says, what torch do you use to solder platinum, and how does it differ from soldering gold or silver? Great question.
Yes, it is. So actually platinum is a bit of a special case in that you do need to have other tools to work with. I'll explain the reason why. Platinum has a very high melting temperature. And so if you get any contamination or dust of yellow gold or silver or anything from your other tools onto that, and then you solder your platinum, those will become embedded in your platinum and it will contaminate the platinum. The assay office doesn't like it and it just doesn't work very well. So you would definitely need separate files. I have a separate soldering block. You don't need flux or platinum. But in terms of the torch, you need a lot more heat. So a little handheld torch just doesn't cut it. You need a torch with a mixed gas and an oxygen supply. And it's technically welding. And you know that when people weld, they actually have safety glasses. So you have to have safety goggles, not the clear ones, the welding ones, when you are using platinum, because platinum goes a very, very bright glowy color and it can actually be harmful to your eyes.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? I was sharing with Hayley when we were talking about this this masterclass that I'll never forget this ring that was made at the jewelry school once, this platinum ring, which was massive, and all the colors that come out of platinum when you put the torch on it are incredible, which is, I think, part of the reason why you need the protection wear. But it was a lady came to us and she was making a 50-year anniversary present, and she wanted 50 diamonds set in this very chunky, thick platinum ring for her husband, and there were like 3 tutors there all just trying to like bend this metal because it was so thick and huge. Lots of torches, lots of heat, but like amazing how it looks afterwards, and you know, all the things you can do with it. So yeah, and the other way that you can work with platinum, if let's say you're not used to working with platinum at all, you don't have any of these extra tools, you're not ready to invest, is by casting it, isn't it? So how would you do that?
Yeah, so you can actually make, whether it be a plain wedding band, an engagement ring, or a cocktail ring, whatever it is, you could make it in sterling silver, or you could make it in wax, and you can have the mold made of that, and into the mold you can have platinum, gold, or whatever you want use. But actually, that's, as you said, that's a really good way of working with platinum, having platinum in your offering, but you don't have to have all the extra tools and accessories and the fear of working with it yourself. So in that case, you would still need to finish it yourself. So you still need different files and some different polishing mops, but that's a really, really good point and a really good way of, in fact, that's how I still work with, for example, if I do a platinum engagement ring, depending on how technical it is, if it's a claw set one with lots of delicate things, I will make it in sterling silver first and have it cast into platinum.
Yeah, so there's lots of options as well, and you know, even if you really couldn't even clean it up or whatever, there's always cleaning up services as well that you can use. So yeah. Really an interest. But thank you for the question, Jan. That was a popular one, it got voted up. So Marianne asked, are there any tips for soldering gold bezel strip onto silver backing? I've tried twice now and my gold bezel sinks into the silver.
Yeah, focus your flame onto the silver base, and don't direct your flame onto the gold bezel at all. Keep the flame moving. That's really it. Yeah,
I guess
just
you
keep the flame.
could you have like a, oh gosh, I can't remember what they're called, the meshes, the wire mesh, so that you can heat underneath, maybe?
Yes, a tripod. Yes, you can have a tripod. That would help actually, because your heat would go from underneath. That's a very good point, Jess. Yeah, that is definitely a good option. Yeah.
Yeah. So you really want to just heat the silver, don't you? If it keeps melting.
Yes. So it sounds to me like, the gold is overheating because it does conduct the silver actually conducts heat very, very well. And it might be that because you're focusing on where the gold is, the silver at that point is actually melting. So if you go from underneath, as Jess suggested, you might lessen that happening.
Yeah, I guess a thicker bezel wire might help. I mean, you can still do it, but it's sometimes that could be something to think about. I often find thin bezel wires are quite difficult to work with anyway, after you've soldered it, because you can't file it at all. And it's nice in the natural setting, but so
that's a good point. Instead of using bezel strip, although with the gold it's quite useful, but you could actually use a thinner sheet metal, so something like a 0.4 mil thick sheet. Definitely it's going to be much trickier to push over, but you're going to get a more substantial bezel, and it's going to withstand just the soldering a bit more as well.
Yeah, but give it a try, Marianne. Let us know how it goes. And there's always lots of troubleshooting things, aren't there, with these projects? And
there's never one answer to it, but it's trial and error, and you'll get there.
Yeah. Wonderful, thank you. Another question from Susan, who says, I've noticed it's often cheaper to buy a wedding ring blank than to buy the raw materials in gold, like gold and solder. And although the blanks need finishing off, they don't need as much work as making from scratch. Most come already hallmarked. If I buy a blank and modify it, I've lost the question. If I buy, there it is. Say texturing it, can I have my maker's mark added to the hallmark by the assay office?
No, you can't. But what you can do is you can buy blanks that aren't hallmarked. And your point about them being a little bit cheaper is it's not always the case, because the price of metals varies and changes all the time. But actually, what you're saving on is your time. So it's a very good point. Jess and I actually chatted about this as well, that having supply of blanks is actually not a bad idea, or going to a supplier for blanks is really, really a very economical way of going about it. You can't add your hallmark to somebody else's hallmark, but you can buy blanks that don't have a hallmark. So don't just stick with your usual supplier. Shop around. There's a few of them out there, and they definitely do provide them. In fact, some of them actually will do your hallmark if you become a regular buyer from them. So you can have your own stamp with them.
Yeah. Brilliant. Interesting one. Good question. Thank you. Okay, there's one from Nora who says, are there any books to refer to learn more about jewelry types and gem types? So I guess any of your favorite books, Hayley. There's lots of there.
Well, my favorite gem setting book is actually Anastasia Young's gem setting book. It's actually in front of me now. I'm just going to lean forward and get
show us.
Let me see if I can grab it.
I can't remember what the exact
stone
setting.
There you go.
Oh, there we go. The Guide to Gemstone Setting Styles and Pens. Yeah.
So that is. I've tried a few. In fact, there's a few very good ones. There's Stone Setting for Contemporary Jewelers by Melissa Hunt, which she's an ex-tutor. That's a really good one as well. To be honest, those are my two favorites. But this gives a lot of excellent drawings, lots of detail. And the other book I would recommend, I'm trying to see if I've got it here as well, but I think, yes, excuse me again.
Go for it.
This is, it's been around forever, and there's different versions, but
yes, the complete method by Tim
it's a bit like a jeweler's Bible, to be honest. It's quite old school in that there's no pretty pictures, it's all hand sketches, but it's really back to the basics of silversmithing, metalsmithing, and I actually refer to this book all the time. Yeah, so there's still things that you can always learn, and this has got all that information in there for you.
Yeah, some great ones to get started with. There's always more to learn.
There's so many books out there, to be honest.
Yeah.
And of course, Jessica's book as well. If you have never worked with metals, but you're curious to get started with, you know, beading and that kind of thing. That's how we all started, was dabbling with beading. And that's a really brilliant book to get you going.
Very fun. Lots of fun projects for doing at home and getting the kids involved in and all of that. So yes, yeah, I enjoyed making that book. It was a lot of fun. Brilliant. Thank you for the question. We have one from Weta, who says, how would you work out the price for a wedding ring compared to a regular silver ring? And she said you've already covered it. We've covered it a little bit. But yeah, I suppose, are there any, do you do like a 3 times markup, or do you just kind of work it out?
So I do the cost of the materials, so that will include the let's say it's gold, a little bit of solder. Now, somebody said previously about buying solder is expensive. Yes, it is, because you can't buy a small amount of solder. You've got to buy a big sheet, which is very expensive. But that sheet will last you for 50 other projects. So what you have to do is break down a percentage of that price and add it to the cost. So the cost of the solder, the cost of the gold, the cost of the hallmarking, a little bit of postage, packaging, and then on top of that, I add my hourly rate. A little bit of overhead costs as well. Hourly rate, I don't charge VAT because I'm not registered for VAT. But if you are registered for VAT, you add that on. And then of course I add, so my hourly rate is essentially, I'm a business. My hourly rate is my salary. But then I'm also, as a business, need to make a profit. Oh, you make that up to be.
Oh, sorry, I dropped you for a second and you're back.
Oh, good. I had a panic.
Your salary and then your overheads, this kind of covers everything, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah. So you're not out of pocket at all.
Yeah. And if you guys do want a more in-depth formula and a spreadsheet for this, we do have one in the Pricing Your Jewelry for Profit session. If you look under how we do it, is we price jewelry in 3 different ways. And the third way, commission-based, that would fall under wedding rings and more expensive work. So perhaps our lovely assistant, Anna, might be able to post a link to that just for anyone who's, you know, who's just kind of new to pricing and thinking about how to do it. But everyone does it in a slightly different way. So it's always interesting to hear how it works for different people. Brilliant. Okay. If you guys, there are lots of questions, so go and have a look at them, and if you want us to answer certain ones, please vote them up, because I'm just going to go from the top down. So Michelle says, I'm a beginner and I had a request to make a simple band with a slight U curve in it. I'm not sure how I would approach this. Any tips? And perhaps we could talk generally about how to do shaping and just a rough overview. This is also covered in the course, just a little plug there.
Yes.
The wishbone, and we cover the wishbone in detail, how to do a full wishbone ring, which is the kind of pointing down. That's my wishbone, which can kind of fit underneath. And Barbara talks about how to do the curve, but it's not actually shown, just so that you know, because it's fairly straightforward. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on the curve.
I'll talk about the curve then, as that's the one that's not covered. But to be honest, I actually use that one quite a lot because it accommodates many engagement ring styles. So even if you've got a princess cut, so a square stone, often people just want a wedding band that doesn't look like it's got lots of different cutout shapes. I mean, people are reluctant to have a cutout band. So they want a gentle band that actually they could wear without the engagement ring. So that curve or a wishbone allows you to do that. So with the curve, what you need to do is, instead of actually making the band and then putting in the bend, you start off with your straight strip of metal. And you need to actually make that strip longer than the standard length. Let's say, for example, you're making a ring and you've cut a strip of wire and it's about 6.5 centimeters. You would probably add on there's not an exact formula. It's a bit trial and error, but probably about 1 to 2 centimeters extra, maybe 2 centimeters extra. And then when you've got that strip, you use your D-shaped pliers or a mandrel, and you create a little curve in the middle of that strip. Once you've got that curve, keep on annealing, bend it round your ring mandrel, and get the size that you need with the curve in place.
Yeah,
it's a bit tricky when you're using a D-shaped wire, because of course the D-shaped wire will want to flip in, but once you just manipulate it as you go, and it's fine.
Yeah, and it's a good idea to practice in silver first, isn't it? Like all these
Very
things.
good idea.
Yeah, so I think it's one of those things. It's not that hard to do. It's just you just have to kind of push the wire in the right directions, and everyone kind of finds their own groove. It's the same with wire wrapping, really. It's I remember before I started wire wrapping, I always just thought there's this magical technique that is going to show me how to do everything, but really it's just telling the wire what to do a lot of the time. And
yes, that's it.
Yeah,
getting a bit aggressive with it and
yeah, you're the boss.
Behave.
You're in charge, and you can do this.
Yes.
So yeah, but I think building up your confidence in silver and then going for it. And I guess, you know, when you were talking about how long to make it, I guess that a deeper curve will mean longer, and a smaller curve will.
So on that note, if you're obviously, that's going to cost a bit more, but if you're worried about wastage at the end, that excess that you cut off, you can either melt it down and reuse it or trade it in again. So wastage of gold is actually not wasted, because you can always use it again or get some money out of it anyway.
Definitely. Never throw away your gold.
Throw it my way.
Send it to us. Brilliant. But yeah, good question, and a fun project to try, Michelle, as well. It's exciting. Maria says, I'd like to take payments in thirds. The first one, material cost. The second one, check in with the clients to allow for their feedback and changes, which may affect the final cost. And the third and final payment at delivery. This system has worked best for me and my clients. Brilliant. So that's less of a question, but just a really good tip.
That's good.
Yeah.
And very nice. Actually, Maria, that's a really brilliant point as well, that you are checking in with your customers or your clients, because we might be on a different page. So you really do have to keep on communicating with your client right through the process. And even sending images and photos as you go, progress shots, because if you end up with something completely different from what they want, that's more devastating than telling them how you're getting on.
Yes, absolutely. And I think people are excited to be brought on the journey, aren't they? It's almost part of the value that we add as handmade designers, is we can say like, oh, these are the strips. I'm just shaping it up. I'm at the bench today, and you can send them a little WhatsApp or whatever if they're doing it. I know with engagement rings, this is always really nice, because normally only one party know about it, and you're kind of telling them, and it's all kind of exciting. I think it helps build their excitement for the piece, and it definitely helps build the relationship with you, because the thing about making someone's wedding ring is they're likely to buy more jewelry in their lifetime, and guess who they're going to want to buy it from once, you know, they've had that bonding experience with you. So yeah, and I think even, you know, I know some designers, I was going to ask you actually, Hayley, about sizing, if it's wrong, and what you do about that, because I think that's something that some people worry about. You know, it's not the end of the world if you do size and then, oh, it's too tight or it's too loose.
Yeah, I mean, that happens a lot, particularly if you are making an engagement ring. The gentleman doesn't, or the partner doesn't always know the other person's size, so you often do have to resize. Just get it sorted. That's it, full stop. If it's a plain piece of metal, you can redo it yourself. You cut where the previous solder join was, and you do it on the same spot. Don't do it on the opposite side, because then you've got two weak areas. If it's an engagement ring and it's stone set, there's various ways around that, and it gets very technical. If it's something you can get out easily, then get the stone out easily and resize it. If it's something that is just too difficult to get the stone out of, send it to somebody who can laser solder it for you.
Yeah.
Honestly, saves so much stress and hassle and time. And actually, if that's the easiest thing for you to do, even if it's just plain metal, do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So always options if things don't go 100% to plan, which if you're making them all the time, there's going to be, just by the law of averages, there's going to be something where, you know, the finger was too hot that day and it was different size and all these things. So if and when that may happen, know that it's happened to all of us at some point.
Oh, yeah. And just deal with it in a friendly, helpful manner. That's it.
Yeah. Good tips. All right, we'll do a couple more questions because there are still lots left, which is brilliant. Lots of interest. So Christine says, what if I get the deposit, start work, and they've changed their mind? Should it be refundable?
No. That's the point of a deposit.
Yeah, because you bought.
I mean, that's at your discretion. But that's why it's probably wise to have some terms and conditions on your website stating that fact. And you can even have a commission agreement that they sign before you get started so that they're perfectly aware that the deposit is to cover the cost of the materials and it's non-refundable. That's that. Of course, there are situations where perhaps you're using metal or gemstones that belong to the client or the customer because they're inherited pieces or what have you. In that case, that is their property and you have to give that back and you might have lost time. And that's just the way it is. You just have to accept that. It's not really worth pursuing it beyond that, in my opinion, unless, of course, it's been a very, something that you see you can potentially take further, but I would say walk away in that case.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think you're right. I think having a contract, or you might call it an agreement or something that they sign, is a really good thing to do. Even if they said like, yeah, I definitely want it, just go for it. Like, it's all very informal, because the act of them signing that, they're essentially committing to you and you're committing to them. And like you said, then there's not going to be any surprises. Because I think the worst thing with customer service is someone thinks something's a certain way and they're like, oh, I'll just cancel it, it's fine, I'll get the deposit back, and then they're shocked, oh, I didn't know, it wasn't clear. So always that clarity, I think, is it can seem over formal, but I think it's important, and everyone appreciates it in the end.
Yeah, if you feel like that is over formal, what I would certainly suggest is don't do all your communication verbally or, on Messenger or whatever, although that is a permanent record, but have something like an email trail where if you haven't got an agreement, you've got images that you've sent, you've got them agreeing to it. So there is proof that all of those stages have been passed. But as long as there's some kind of traceable record of all of that, but an agreement is really the best way to go.
Yeah, brilliant. And that would apply to any commission, wouldn't it? These things, anything that you're making for somebody specifically. I did want to ask about solder, because I've seen it come up a few different times in different places. So when we're talking about, obviously we try and match the solder to the metal. So with platinum solder, with 18 karat yellow gold, 18 karat yellow gold solder, with rose gold solder. If you can't get hold of the particular type of solder for any reason, because some of them are quite niche, and if you've got certain solder and you don't want to buy a whole new sheet, are there any times when you can use different solder, and how does that work?
Well, it's not advisable if you're going to have your piece hallmarked, because the assay office will pick up on that. When it is acceptable is if you're mixing metals anyway. So, for example, if you're using 18 karat yellow gold bezel strip on a silver base, then you can use sterling silver solder. That's absolutely fine, because you've got that metal in there anyway. It's not acceptable to use 9 karat gold solder on 18 karat. That's just a no-no. You'll see it, and it just will diminish the product, so it's not good.
And would you ever do it the other way around if you had a higher carat, or like with 14 and 18 karat, or is it just really advisable to try and stick with what?
Yes, I mean, you could do it the other way down, because but it will still be noticeable. 14 karat is an interesting one, because it is quite close to 18 karat, but you can also use it on 9. But even every time a batch of gold is made up, there is a slight variation in the, I mean, there shouldn't be, but sometimes there is, particularly with rose gold. That's the worst one. So it's a judgment, but it's not, it's frowned upon by the assay office, and that's the main guide, really.
Yeah. So we want to stick with the right one as
what you can try and do is, yes, because gold solder is so expensive, you can buy the strips, the sheet strips, but you can also buy solder wire. And that is actually much more affordable, and you can buy it by length. So and although it's quite delicate, you can hammer it down to make it a bit wider and easier to cut. So look out for that. But also there are some smaller suppliers. I can't really think about the one that I used to use. They've kind of changed, they're not there anymore, but seek out, there might be smaller suppliers who are prepared to sell you half a panel or a quarter panel of solder. And maybe even in, you know, times at the moment, suppliers will be prepared to do that as well. So ask, you never know.
Yeah, definitely. I've definitely bought half sheets of solder, even from Cookson's. So there's definitely different options out there. And then I guess if you're just making bands, you tend to just use hard solder, just reducing the need to buy all the different ones. But if you're doing engagement rings and you've got lots of settings, you might need the hard, medium and easy as well.
Well, on that point actually about soldering, you're quite right, because when you're soldering with gold, unlike with silver, you don't need to conduct your heat around the whole piece. So there's less chance of other solder joins falling apart. So you could use hard solder quite comfortably through a vast majority of a project. So stick with hard.
Yeah, saves a bit of money. Saves a bit of outlay. Brilliant. All right, let's do one more question. Which one to choose? I'm just going to go for luck. I'm just going to try and find the next one down. What about palladium?
I have to be honest, I've actually never used palladium myself, but it's a popular choice. It's an affordable choice and it's durable, but I've never used it myself. So
okay, that's an interesting one. We do have people that use palladium, or we certainly used to at the jewelry school. I think it's from the platinum family, so I think they're very similar, but I think the heat doesn't need to be quite as high, and it's obviously a lot cheaper. But casting is another way that you could work with palladium. But yes, an interesting one. I haven't used it either, so but I've definitely seen that it can be used. So it's definitely an option out there. And I guess the last thing I will ask, because I think it has been asked a couple of times, is about the sizing online. Have you ever sized these rings online, and how has that played out?
So do you mean discussing it with a customer online, or?
So let's say you're just selling the ring online and you never meet the customer, how you would get them to have an accurate size?
Well, you can actually you can buy portable ring sizes. They're like little plastic strips, and I know plastic is a bit frowned upon, but they're very useful and they can be reused. And I've actually posted those out to customers before. But there's also there's several apps that you can actually use. For example, if a gentleman or a lady is proposing, anybody is proposing to somebody, but they want it to be secret. If somebody's got a ring that they already wear, you can put the ring onto the phone and it actually measures up the size. Obviously that often happens when that's a right hand ring and the wedding finger is the other hand, but it gives you a fairly good ballpark, because the size will probably be different. But if you can find it, if they are left or right handed, if they're mainly right handed, it might be about a half size or a full size down on the left hand. Yeah.
And I think that's a really good point, you know, sending out some ring sizes. I've seen some jewelers who do it with a piece of string as well, which I know it can feel like we're just asking you to do it with string, but we're trying to get, you know, the best measurement. And I know from someone who I've sized before is asking them to use the thickest part of their finger, because sometimes this bit is thicker than this bit, and that can cause issues with putting it on and all sorts of things. But perhaps also, if you're selling it online, have a longer lead time, so that if it doesn't fit, they can send it back, you can get it resized, or they could perhaps take it somewhere to be resized if they're, you know, on the other side of the world. So maybe time is just the thing that you really need more than anything to to make sure that there's not sort of super stress around.
I think when somebody's buying something online, they need to be aware that, you know, it might not be exactly the right size, and perhaps that's something you can put in your description, that you know, we all, you know, sizes are variable, and if you need to resize it, is it something you're going to charge for, or are you going to allow an extended returns policy or what have you?
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. But don't let it stop you, because, you know, every business has challenges. You know, someone might buy an item online of clothing that's the wrong size, they've got to send it back and all these things. And again, this is where the customer service comes in. If you are someone they've built a relationship with, if you maintain the communication and all of those things, then they'll appreciate it so much in the long run, and all of those things. So I know there are lots more questions, but we have run out of time for today. But we are in the Facebook group as well, and I know that tons of people in this community have loads of experience as well. So if there's anything that you've asked that you just thought, oh, I really needed to know that, come and ask it in the Facebook group. I'm sure Anna will pop the link to the Facebook group as well in for everyone. And either me or Hayley, or, you know, someone else in the community can come and help you guys out, because it's a wonderful thing to be able to do. And just before we go, make sure you join the wedding rings class if you haven't already, because it is out on Friday, and I've seen it all. It's amazing. It's you know, it's just a great way to add this other line of things to be able to offer your customers, and it's the practical side. So today we've been talking about all the business side and also kind of considerations, but Barbara just takes you through from the very beginning of what you order, how you make it, how you size it, how you fit it under an engagement ring, and polishing and finishing to a high shine or a matte finish. So lots of good things to have a look at in there. And Hayley also has an engagement ring course on our site as well. So any members who already signed up, go and check it out. It's a really great course. And anyone who hasn't signed up for that, you can also join that on the site too. So Hayley, thank you so much for sharing.
My pleasure. Thank you for all your questions as well, from both yourself and everybody out there. It's been brilliant. It's a really good area to discuss.
It is. I'm sure we could talk for another hour or two, but we're all passionate about gold and wedding rings and jewelry and all those things. And I'm sure we'll see you again on another session too. Alrighty, well, take care, everyone, and bye for now. Stay safe.
Bye.
And we'll see you on another course soon.